Are you intimidated by pivot tables? Is the lack of familiarity with pivots keeping you from harnessing the numerous pivot table benefits? Do you think they're complicated? In this tutorial, we will take it from the beginning, and in an easy step-by-step way, we will conquer your fears and show you how much you'll be missing out. Welcome back. In this example, we're going to use data from a fictitious XYZ corporation, which is the annual sales by customer and project for 2022. Regarding pivot tables, the success of a good structured pivot table depends on the clear understanding of the data that we're working with. In our example, we have an extract. It's about 160 lines. In reality, you could be using with thousands of lines from your ERP systems. So basically what we're looking at here is the invoice date, the invoice number, the customer name, the project code, the area, due date of the invoice, the amount of the invoice, and if there is an open balance. First thing that we need to do is actually go and review that the data is in good standing. There was a checklist that we had to go through. Let's quickly go over this right away. So basically we're looking at that the data needs to be in a tabular form. Looks like a table, like we have it here. Columns, rows of information. That's the tabular form. Second, the column headers need to have descriptive names, because these are the column headers will be the pivot fields that will appear down the road when you try to create your pivot. The next thing we have to check if there were any blank columns or any blank rows. We did check that. The other thing we need to check if there were any duplicate records. Most likely there aren't, because this is an extract from our ERP financial system. The last thing you need to do is check for if any records are incomplete. If you have any extracts that, let's say that you may be missing an invoice number, or you don't have a due date or the area, any missing information that might skew your analysis as you're going to start creating the pivot table. Last but not least, and very important, check the format of the columns of the data. You look at a date, it has to be a date. If we go to the Home tab and we click on any date rows, then we look at it and it says general. So we know that this is a text date. Here's a quick way to convert the dates to true dates and the amounts from text amounts to true amounts. We're going to use a little trick, which basically is the copy-paste special trick. So let's put the value here, temporarily value 1. I'm going to copy this value and I'm going to highlight and select my date, right click, select paste special, and now we want to multiply. When I do that, I get numbers. Basically, this is the numeric representation of a date. So now if I right click and format the field, right click, we go to format cells. Now when I go to date, I can format the dates any which way we prefer. We're just going to leave it in the standard form. Click OK. Now notice that the fields appear as dates. Okay, let's repeat this quickly for the other date column. Now we have the amounts. Let's change the amounts. So here we're going to use the a little variation. I'm going to make this 1 and I'm going to format it as a dollar, as an accounting. So now I'm going to copy this and I'm going to select both columns, right click, select Paste Special and multiply and click OK. Now notice that now all the numbers change to accounting and we are ready to move on to the next steps. Let's create a pivot table. Click anywhere inside our data. At the Home tab, click Insert, select Pivot Table, confirm the range of the pivot table that all your data has been selected. That looks good. And we want to create the pivot table to a new worksheet. Click OK. We have been presented with the main interface of the pivot table. On our left, we have the area where the pivot table report is appearing as we are constructing it. To the right, we have the main controls of the pivot table. At the top, we have the pivot table fields. These are all the fields available to use in our analysis. And if you notice, these are the column headers from a data before. Let's summarize the total sales by customer based on our data. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to take the customer name and move it to the rows area. So you're looking, all the customers are listed here. And then we're going to take the amount and put it to the values area. So this is a total sales. And also we will move the open balance amount to calculate the open amount owed to the company. If you click on the field, select Value Field Settings, Summarize Value Field By. This is the area that we select what operation we want to use as an aggregate. We want to use the sum function, count, average, and so on and so forth. In our example, we're going to use the sum. At the custom name, we can change the name. Instead of saying sum of amount, to use a more appropriate name. So this will, let's call it total sales. And then let's format the number as currency. Select this format, click OK, and click OK. Let's do the same for the other field, the open balance field. We're going to use sum. We want the total of open amount owed to the customer. Let's call it open total open. Let's format it. Currency. Click OK. Click OK. Let's add more dimensions to our pivot. Let's bring the project under the customer name. So now under each client, you see the projects and the total bill per project and the open amount per project. Format we're working with currently, it's called a compact format. The reason it's called a compact format is no matter how many fields we add, all these groupings appear in the same column. So If I add area, notice that you have the vendor, you have the project, and you have the area information. But notice again, everything is appearing in the same column. And as you keep adding fields, the information gets intended to the right within the column. So this is the compact report. My personal favorite is the tabular report. And I'm going to show you how you can go and change it, and I use that as a default. Right-click anywhere on the pivot and select right away Pivot Table Options. Click Display and select Classic Pivot Layout. Click OK. And there you have it. Each field from the rows appears as a separate column. So I use this as my default setup. Let's perform more analysis on our sales data. So let's remove the customer name. Let's add the area. By adding the area, right now we have total sales and amount owed by area, Europe and USA. Let's bring the project also in. So now we're looking at a breakdown of the sales by project for each area. There is a subtotal. There is a subtotal by area, and then you have the grand total. Let's remove the fields from the rows area. Now let's add the project. So now we have projects. And we have the total sales per project and the open amount owed per project. In this view, we have total sales by customer. And let's add the project. When adding the project below, notice that next to the customer, you get the plus or minus sign, which basically indicates that there is a group and there is a subgroup. To expand or collapse the data, you can do that individually at each client. For example, click on the check. So now you have the projects and total sales per project and amount owed per project. If you right click on any field, you can select under expand collapse, you can select expand entire field, and what this will do will expand all the groups in your pivot to the next level. When you create a pivot table, there are two new tabs that are appearing at the Home tab. One is called Pivot Table Analyze, and the other one is called Design. Let's go to the design. This area deals specifically with the design look of your pivot table. There are a couple of sections of interest. When you look at the subtotal section, when you click on that, you have the option to do not show subtotals. So you see all the subtotals are being removed. Or show all subtotals at the bottom of the group. So now you have per customer, you have the subtotal per customer. Next one is the grand totals. You can disable grand totals from the rows and columns. If you click on the first one, when we look at the bottom, the grand totals disappear. Let's go back to it and bring it up on for rows and columns, and there they appear again. To the right, you have banded rows or banded columns. If you wanted to show that, see now you get highlights every other row, which facilitates the reading of a report. You can remove them. You can also do banded columns. In addition, you can change the look. There are many default styles. You can select any style, preview, and select the one you want. Now let's go to the PIvotTable Analyze tab. To the left, under PIvotTable name, you see a PIvotTable name given by default by Excel. It's good practice to name your pivot tables to refer to the report you're working with. So let's call this Sales Pivot. To the right, the expand collapse field. If you collapse the field, everything gets collapsed to the parent group. Everything gets collapsed to the parent group. If you expand, everything gets expanded. There are some other wonderful and useful tools that we're going to get to it later. At the show area, we have the icon for field list. If we press that, the field list of the pivot disappears. If we click on it again, it appears. So if you close it by accident, you can either right click on it anywhere on the pivot and say show field list, or you can click on PIvotTable Analyze and select show field list. Next button, next icon correspond to the expand collapse buttons. You have the option to show them or not show them. In this section, we will be discussing the sorting and filtering tools available to pivot tables. If you click to the arrow next to the column name, we can sort A to Z in alphabetical order, or we can sort in reverse order. Let's select the reverse order. So now we're looking at the customer sales data sorted in reverse order. If we go back to it, click on the down arrow, we can sort A to Z in ascending order. When we sort, there is an arrow appearing next to the field name that shows if we're sorting ascending or descending. In this example, we sorted ascending, so we see the up arrow. If we switch to sort descending, now you look at it at the down arrow. So by looking at that, you know right away how this column is sorted. If you click on the value fields and right click on any of the value fields, you can sort smallest to largest or sort largest to smallest. So if you need to see which customer brought you the most sales, let's order sort largest to small. So now your pivot has been rearranged, showing the highest amount of sales on top and the lowest amount of sales on the bottom. So you can easily identify who are your top paying clients. We're looking at the project data with sales per project. So if we wanted to see the highest in sales project, all we have to do is just right click on any of the fields under total sales, select sort largest to smallest. So this brings up the highest project sales on top and the lowest project in sales on the bottom. There are many instances when we want to filter the information at the pivot based on a certain criteria. Let's bring the area field into the filters area. Notice that the field area appears in the filter section of your pivot. When you click on that, on the arrow next to it, you have the options that you can select to filter your data. So if we wanted to see the projects in Europe, let's click in Europe and say OK. So now we're looking at Europe, the projects, and the gross sales for the European projects. If we want to change value, click again and select USA. Now we're looking at the projects in USA. Whenever there is a filter set, notice the funnel that appears next to the field name. If you need to clear the filter or remove the filter, click again on the field and select all in this case, so the filter has been removed. Let's bring in the customer also into the rows. You can also set filters in the field columns. Click on the arrow next to the field name, so you can select all or deselect or select, or you can select specific customer. So now we're looking at project sales for customer Galt Ltd. Since we have a filter at the customer name, the funnel appears right with the arrow. If you wanted to clear the filter or remove the filter, you can either go back and say select all, so that brings you back to where you were, or you can just say clear filter from customer name and you're back where you started. Let's go to the project. We can also set up what is called value filters. That's where we specify specific ranges of values in order to filter through our projects. For example, show me all the projects with sales greater or equal to 60,000. So we're going to click value filters, and here are the options. So we're going to select greater than or equal to, and let's put 60,000. There you have it. You have all the projects, 60,000 and above in sales. When you're looking at the funnel indicator, you see that you have the value filter checked, and it's also sorted in reversing order. Clear your filter, you're back where you started. Let's move on to the next section. In this section, we will discuss how we can reuse the pivot tables we just created. So what happens when we want to redo the same report with totally new data? Or what happens when we want to append new data, additional data to this existing report? How does a pivot table behave? Do I have to start all over again? No, you don't. Let's demonstrate this example. We have additional data from Asia that we can bring into a pivot. A very important point. The new data you're bringing into the table has to be in the same format and order like the original data. So let's select the new data. So this is our original extract. So now we would like to add the new information. So let's go to the bottom of the report, the next available row, and do Control V for paste. So now we have the Asia report also as part of our data. Let's go to a pivot table. When new data is added to the pivot table, we need to refresh the pivot. To do that, right-click on the pivot and select Refresh. Now notice that we don't see the Asia data yet. Another way to refresh your data is from at the Home tab, from the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and you go Refresh, but nothing is happening. When information does not show into the pivot, we need to make sure that the pivot table is including the new data we added. To check that, we go at the Home tab to the Pivot Table Analyze, and we select the icon that says Change Data Source. When you click on that, Excel is taking us back to our original data file, and you see what the original selection was. So we know what the problem is here, because the pivot selection of data stops at line 163 and does not include the new data. So all we have to do is expand the selection and the information will appear at the pivot. So click at the range, include the new rows, and click OK. And there you have it. The new data appears now in our report. So if we wanted to, let's collapse the entire field. So the new area sales info appears on our pivot. Rule of thumb, every time we add new data to a pivot, we need to come up to change data source and revise the pivot selection. You can create your pivot reports, have them ready. Whenever you get additional data, all you have to do, just copy paste it into your pivot data details, change the data source, make sure that the new range now includes the new data, and refresh your pivot. And right there, you never have to start from scratch going forward. I hope by now you got a sense of how important and useful pivot tables are in order to analyze your data. It saves you so much time, all the manual work you will have to do by entering manual formulas to get summaries. Everything is done in pivots by just dragging fields around. In the next video, we're going to dive deeper in the functionality of pivot tables by presenting you with additional features.